Okay, so good morning. Welcome to today's Comprehensive Tactical Athlete System Clinic. Today we're actually be talking about the human domain. The two primary pillars of CTAS we're going to be talking about are going to be the Resilience Readiness Program as well as the Leadership Development Program. So a little bit different from what we've talked about over the last few months, but important nonetheless. Keep in mind, remember, there's 8 pillars to the overall CTAS, to the overall system, right? To this H2F aspect that we're bringing here at the 166 RSG. And these are just 2 of those pillars. So as you just saw when I started, I want you to think about this question for a little bit. It's something that we ask in many different PMEs, and we mean it in many different ways depending on the topic that we're discussing throughout our career as soldiers. But I would like to know each of your ideas or what comes to mind rather when you read this question.
Yep. Oy.
Go ahead.
So I think so what really makes a leader, in my opinion, is like people like actually want to follow you.
Okay.
It's more than of I'm the boss type of stuff, and people follow you because they have to, not because they want to. So somebody that you want to, like, como que lo quieres coger de ejemplo, ¿cómo se dice eso?
Want to get them as a sample.
Exactly, as like a role model.
All right. So someone that people want to follow, rather than someone that just necessarily maybe have the rank and position that would otherwise make them follow them. Yeah. Right. Good.
Yeah, in my case is when you are able to influence in people. A boss is a leader because he have that authority delegated. But when you're a leader, you earn that confidence and that trust from your soldiers and from your subordinates, and you can influence in them whatever the methods are from your units.
Okay, so we're having a theme going on here. What do you think, Sergeant Watts?
Roger, yeah, kind of agree with something Virgil said. Also, someone that provides direction and motivation to accomplish the mission or to improve the organization. So, pretty much what the last 2 sergeants had just said. Someone that their soldiers trust to follow, and that is that role model or that guide to just overall success in all aspects of soldiering.
All right, good. So we have the concepts of a role model. We have the concepts of someone that soldiers or individuals in general, right? Because leaders exist outside of our organization, but the concept that it comes from the person being led more so than the person leading, at least for some of that, right? So Sergeant Watts added the purpose and direction, which obviously comes from the leader themselves. So that's taking, in our specific occupation, we are taking our commander's vision, our commander's intent, because commanders are the only ones that can have intent. And then we are expressing that as leaders, whether you are an officer or a non-commissioned officer, hopefully influencing your soldiers so that they want to follow you, right? So with that being said, from each of us, in what ways, because we're Compo 3, right? So TPU, even though some of us are AGR and full-time staff, in what ways do we normally see us as leaders leading, and how does that change at different levels?
Can you say it again? In what ways?
Yeah, so based on your anecdotal experience, things that you've observed, whether over battle assemblies or during the week, what ways have you seen us, specifically in our occupation, lead?
Like you, in your case?
If you want to use that as example, or you or anyone else that you've seen. Yeah. How do you normally see people lead?
You can see a different manners to lead and from different people. And in my case, I've been trying to observe all of them and try to get the best part of everybody so I can be a balanced leader.
Okay.
Be flexible when I have to be flexible, but also hold my foot when I have to hold my foot, but still gaining the confidence and trust of the soldier, and also let those subordinates know that I can be a number 2, not a number 1, because a number 2 can follow and also can have people follow him. So for me, I believe when you are a balanced leader, that's the best of the both worlds.
That's such a critical point. That's a critical point. Thank you. You brought up something that someone rarely mentions when we have discussions on leaderships, is that specific balance of, as a leader, also following, and what that means, among many other good things, right? So observing the qualities in others that you want to be able to emulate. Okay?
Yes, because when you follow, that's allow you to receive feedback, and you don't have that ego that no, nobody can tell me how to do my job. No, I can receive a feedback and I could become better, because that's should be the goal for every human being, not just a leader. For every human being, is just to receive whatever information as a CTAS, because we've been working out, we've been having our information from internet, from books, but we still are able to receive new information and leave the old stuff, and because we have to be perfect, we have to be the best of the best.
Good. Thank you so much for that. And a word that really encompasses a lot of that for us in this room, for that we don't always see in leaders, is humility, right? Being humble. Not necessarily, it's not always necessarily about the rank that's in the chest, the years of experience and what you've done. And typically, you know, if a leader has to remind someone of their rank and position in order to lead, usually they've lost kind of that psychological high ground, for lack of better terminology, right? You need to influence others. You know, they should, as Sergeant Gonzalez brought up earlier, you want your individuals to follow you because they want to follow you, not because they need to follow you. So that's an excellent point. What do you think, Sergeant Gonzalez? What is an experience that you've had more specifically, or can you give an example of sometime you've observed leadership, whether good, efficient, or inefficient? Not necessarily good or bad, but efficient.
I mean, like, in order to lead people efficiently, you have to know what makes them tick. You know, like, you have to understand your soldiers, and for that, you have to get to know them. And so, in my opinion, the fact that you go up to a person, why do you do these certain things and aspects of your life? And if you understand those things, you're gonna get a better feed and a better way on how to treat that certain individual, because every person is a different universe, you know?
Exactly. And that, again, you start to see all of this ties together with the humility aspect. One of the biggest psychological downfalls that we have, especially in our culture, but generally as adults, and this is actually covered quite a bit in MRT, in the Master Resiliency Trainer course, is the fact that with regards to psychology, we as adults tend to initially offer advice based off of experiences before we ask questions. And when we see an opportunity, or we see someone doing something, even if it's an event that we know requires correction because something's being done inefficiently, when we step in and we immediately say, this is how you should do this, or this is how I would do this, without inquiring as to why that person did what they did, or inquiring what that person knows or how they know it, we invalidate that individual to a large extent. And we change their behaviors ever so slightly in that instance to make them less likely to want to respect and follow us, even if they don't necessarily acknowledge it. Now, of course, our occupation has times where life, limb, and eyesight, right, could be at risk. So if you need to pull someone out of the way, get them to do something, there's times where we have to directly lead people. Absolutely, I'm not saying that's not the case. But in our day-to-day, especially in a garrison environment, when we do not enforce critical thinking, increase the capabilities of our soldiers to have creative and critical thinking opportunities, and assess what they know, regardless of their rank, regardless of their age, their biological sex, regardless of our observations of their experience, we invalidate them. And that only leads to detriment instead of benefit. So good. What do you think, Sergeant Watts? What's an example of leadership that you've experienced?
Are we referring to good or bad?
What was it? Say it one more time.
Are we referring to good or bad leadership?
Yeah, that's a really good point, right? So is there such a thing as good or bad leadership?
Yes, I believe so.
So expound upon that for us, please.
Because it kind of correlates with Sean Cabrera said, you got to have that balance. Like, you got to have balance of knowing when to apply pressure and knowing when collaboration is necessary and knowing when you have to give your soldiers a chance to develop opposed to having a fear of failure, because failure can be good in their
Such a
development.
good point.
So I feel like that's impediment. Well, yeah, that's key within leadership and development of soldiers.
That's another very, very, very good point, right? There's a lot of things being mentioned up. Sometimes we don't allow opportunities for our soldiers to fail. And when we protect them so much from failure, we often prevent them from properly succeeding. The boundaries for liability and not necessarily safety from health, but the boundaries that usually constrain us to make sure that we do something specifically and therefore not allowing failure, typically don't allow us to exceed those boundaries to excel, right? That's one of the biggest impediments, as Sergeant Watts used, for creative and, again, critical thinking, which is where most PMEs, most professional military educations for non-commissioned officers are trying to get individuals to understand, how do you approach a situation differently? Like, what are the different ways that we can look at each of these opportunities and the variables that are involved? But I want to challenge, even whether, not saying you're incorrect in any way, shape, or form, but I want to challenge as devil's advocate, right? From a philosophical perspective, do you think that we have, and this is for all three of you, good/bad leaders, or do we have efficient/inefficient leaders? And when I say that, what do you think is the difference?
Efficient, inefficient.
Why?
Because I know the deepest intent is to do right, is to do good, but they don't have the right manners to manage that.
All right.
That's my approach.
Okay.
I think I'm gonna go with good and bad.
Okay.
Because I have my fair share of bad leaders and people that simply just don't care, and that's the main thing about being a leader. You're supposed to care and wonder and ask, like, hey man, what's going on with you? Or story time. Had
Go
this
ahead.
guy that was so bad, man. I'm not gonna say his name, you guys might know him, but this guy, he didn't like us. We're in Puerto Rico, he didn't want us like speaking Spanish at all. And he got mad, like, no, you can't speak Spanish, you can't speak Spanish. I was like, dude, we're in a mobilization, our whole unit is Puerto Rican. How are we not gonna talk Spanish? He was pissed. To me, that was just like, what can you not learn it, dude? I don't know.
Okay, so he may have had his own biases that influence his emotions, right? That kept him from effectively leading in that sense. And to you, because of that lack of empathy toward the individuals he was around, may have shown that he didn't care, and you interpret that as a bad leader.
He closed himself up to us. Like, he didn't even like offer any perspective in the different topics we were doing as a unit.
Absolutely.
We were a supply section, and he would just leave me, a sergeant, and he was another sergeant, and he would just leave us two to do the work, and he would just like isolate himself. So I think that's just like, and he's the one, like the main
Right.
supply guy. So he was supposed to have like more input, but he just didn't.
Interesting. We're going to come back around to that for a few points. Sergeant Watts, what do you believe? Inefficient/efficient, or good/bad leader, and why?
Personally, I think all of them apply, just depending on the situation. Because you can have leaders that have good intent, but they just don't understand their population. They don't know how to get through to them. Or you can have just a leader that just don't know what's going on and is just out of tune with how the flow of things is supposed to happen to better improve his or her organization.
Okay, good. So the reason I'm asking questions in this way, when it comes to the resiliency aspect of CTAS, and it comes to us as leaders, because every single one of us in this room have a leadership rank, even if we may not have a leadership position. And that's another key distinction, right? So when it comes to what is the purpose of leader and what is a leader, right? For Zensi, which is essentially psychology, or at least a part of psychology that helps you understand how do you bounce back, how do you establish a more firm cognitive base to prevent yourself from some of these situations that we've actually just discussed. But good and bad implies morality, right? So good would imply that someone's intent typically is for the benefit of themselves and other individuals being typically seen as a more benevolent aspect, right, for good. And then when someone is more malicious with intent specifically to harm other individuals, that is typically seen as bad. And we have, I'm sure, experienced both of those situations, but most of the time, at least from my subjective experience, even individuals in leadership positions that have been horrid at being able to maintain that their duties and responsibilities, I would still see them as efficient or inefficient, because to me, rank and position doesn't make someone a leader.
Right.
It gives you responsibility. And the more rank and different duty positions absolutely give you more responsibility. But I don't see responsibility as leadership, right? I can see leadership occur in any individual, regardless of age and rank. And therefore, I typically look at it as efficient or inefficient, rather than good or bad leadership. I can see good and bad in actions. And my moral compass is a little bit different on creative aspects of that, right? But that's generally how I see it. And I think it's good to be able to talk about that, because the intent of kind of being more open-minded in our approach and seeing how we use words normally and the general meaning of them can change a huge scope of how we visualize almost everything, right? Good. Anyone have further input they want to add on those pieces so far?
Yeah, because also when you portray somebody as a bad leader, he's not a leader. Because just the fact that he wants to harm somebody, that's not a leader. That's a boss, because they have that authority delegated. It's not because he's influencing, in people. That's why I say efficient and inefficient. Because, like I said, maybe we have leaders that they don't have the perfect manner to manage that leadership, but they have the right intention to move forward the mission, complete the medals, complete the task, but not in the best efficient way.
Exactly. Now, with that, why do we have potentially such poor efficacy with leadership? Right? We're seen as our military force having the greatest strength, commonly stated, the greatest strength of our military force, and we are generally seen as the best military force in the world, is our NCO Corps, which revolves around leadership, right? So leadership itself is seen as our absolute greatest strength. But generally, when you look among the ranks and you think about your units and the past units you've been in, we see leadership positions, right? You have your commander and your first sergeant, your CSM, maybe your platoon sergeants and things like that. But generally, out of a company of 100, how many leaders do you typically see and recognize?
You can pick them with your fingers.
Yes.
Very small population.
Maybe 3, 5 per unit?
At most.
At most.
How many should there be in a unit?
Everybody should.
Yeah.
Everybody should be a leader. Because we have been having information, we've been having training, we have a lot of discussion of that. But I believe what Gonzalo told us a few minutes ago, like our leaders stop to understand their people's situation. They just come to accomplish a mission, whatever it takes.
Absolutely, I completely agree. So let's take all of that, everything that's going through your mind with the conversations we've had so far, and let's not shift it, but let's mold that into application, practical application. We are, again, for those of us that are AGR, we are full-time staff in support of TPU. The large majority of our force, both in the Army and within our specific population, are reservists, right? TPU, which means that we get time with them approximately 10 times out of the year, maybe 11, right? So with those small and very infrequent opportunities, we must absolutely capitalize on providing leadership examples and providing time for them to lead. Now, very often what we do for this are maybe classes on leadership or these small little events that kind of focus around it. And then as Sergeant Cabrera brought up, we get back to the mission. And there's so many missions. There's always different missions. But what I want to challenge leaders, especially senior leaders throughout our brigade, to start thinking about is how do we apply leadership experience and examples into everything that we do? And the doctrine's already there. Most of the things I'm saying aren't necessarily innovative. The synchronization of them might be, but they're just not done. They're typically put aside, whether due to, inefficient practices and things like that. But let's look at different ways that we can actually apply leadership. So the first part of this would be through our physical readiness training program, right? So when it comes to physical training and leadership, from a commander's perspective, from a command team's perspective, they typically look at readiness, right? So they'll pull in CSMM data and they'll be able to see how many people have taken the physical fitness test, how many people passed, how many people failed. And then now that, with the ability to actually see ACFT data as people start being able to post it, be able to see how well people are actually performing, right? So you have that somewhat. But even in that notion of passing physical fitness tests, although necessary to be able to advance in rank and to go to professional military education and to go to a lot of these courses, right, to actually be MOSQ, you don't need a passing PT test to deploy. And it's unfortunate, but that piece is in there specifically due to the cultural aspect of the problem of trying to get people to change their behaviors and start increasing their physicality in general. Which, if we discussed before, the average person that doesn't work out often is because of ignorance, right? They don't necessarily know how or know better, and they don't understand the detriment that they're doing by not being physically active. They may think that is something that they can't do because of their age or their biological sex or their temporary injury, even though their temporary injury may have lasted for 4 or 5+ years. Because of ignorance, they don't necessarily know how they can improve to get better, to do what they need to do. So typically when you sit down and you have, staff meetings with the commander or Cubs and things like that, what the commander sees in this brief aspect are numbers, and we see our metrics for, something like the ACFT, not necessarily our capabilities. What we don't typically discuss are how many individuals are inefficient at this particular biomechanical pattern. Say running's always failed. What are we actually doing in programming and planning to fix the efficacy of running ergonomics amongst our soldiers? The lack of education with running, and it's something we haven't approached. Typically, we just tell our soldiers to run more and then hope that they run more by the time we see them again, right? We've given them that advice, boom. We don't know, because we may have not asked and discussed with them, why they aren't running more. What opportunities they have to run, how often, the environment, do they have any specific goals that conflict with that, injuries that they need to rehabilitate from first, and then resources we can provide them to help them rehabilitate from that first. Maybe they're depressed and they can't even muster the will to go and train because their overall endocrine system, the hormonal system, is so imbalanced right now and they need help, but we don't know because we haven't asked them, we haven't discussed it with them before we can get to the running. But the test itself could have been a good indicator that something is off. And then how do we approach that off, right? So even with physical training, there's already a lot that kind of comes in here. And in addition to that, things that we're not doing are things like high performance demand tests, HPDTs that you see on there, or mission essential task occupational skill training. So that means having an MFT or having a CTAS member within the unit to look at their demands. Right, you have to be able to set up drash tents. You have to be able to perform, patrols. You have to be able to do detainee operations, set up showers, or whatever the thing is, right? You have to be able to transfer vehicles and bind chains. What are the biomechanical demands of this occupation? And then how do we change our physical training to match our biomechanical demands so that we are both working on skill and working on physical training and assessing both of those simultaneously from a leadership perspective during battle assembly, right? Because if we just go out and get our soldiers tired on a run, or we do something to get them sore during battle assembly, cool. They had a workout. But we all know that's not going to carry over into necessarily positive habits or a better PT score by the next month. So all we can use for those battle assemblies are times for leaders to work with their soldiers, to train their soldiers, and to assess their soldiers, which comes down to how we train. What should be the element size that we train with during battle assembly for physical training? What do you think?
How many people should we train at the same time?
Yep.
It really depends on, I'm sorry,
Squad.
So he's saying squad. What do you think? You said depends.
I think it really depends on what we're trying to train for.
Okay. Why?
Because the more people it is, the harder it is to get to all of them, and how to target an individual per se. I look at it as I do jiu-jitsu, and in jiu-jitsu classes, it's probably like 10 people at most, because you get your sensei to look at what you're doing. Hey, you're doing this wrong. You're doing this right.
Exactly.
So you have to have more time with each individual, because everybody is different,
Yes, exactly. Even from a collegiate perspective, a coach to athlete ratio typically shouldn't exceed 1:7.
Mm-hmm.
But what do we generally see for physical training in the Army?
The whole unit.
A whole unit,
Yeah.
platoon. And then if we have the platoon sergeants or leadership, if they're even involved, if the leadership are involved, they're usually trying to set the example, which isn't a bad thing, right? But then train with the soldiers. So you may have one PRT leader right out there coming up with something for everyone to do. Then if people are just going through the motion, even if they're tired and they're trying, but they're doing so with the inefficient form, they could be increasing the risk of injury, and they're not really getting anything out of it because they're not being assessed. So this opens one of the first opportunities for leadership. As Sergeant Cabrera brought up, training at the squad, even down to the team level, if the squad/section is large enough, because still detachments may have sections, HHCs, battalions, brigades are all units. And sometimes they forget that. Sometimes they always look at the lower echelons as the unit and them as separate, but every single soldier, from the sergeant major of the Army to the private, that just graduated IET environment, to the civilian that just signed the contract today, that's going to go to IET, every single one of those have the same, every single one of those individuals have the same demands overall as far as being a soldier. And so all of them need to participate in things like this. But it should be held at the squad/section. If you're at a command level, or you're a brigade level, and your section are all absolute senior leaders, then that's fine. Everyone has a boss, right? Everyone should have that leader leading that physical training session to provide them an opportunity to assess their soldiers' capabilities, where their weaknesses are. And if that doesn't happen, then they can't have dialogue with their soldiers on, hey, I saw that you were hurting here, or I saw that you couldn't do this. Why do you feel you couldn't do this? How do we get opportunities for our leaders to have those discussions with our soldiers so they can understand how to help them get better? Right. Any thoughts on this so far? Sergeant Watts or anyone else that's in the room? All right, so for the practicality of this is the way I would want us to potentially move forward, and how I intend for our brigade's policy in order for CTAS to meet, Colonel Slaughter's intent, is this. The squad leader should be the one developing their squad/section's physical readiness training program, both for battle assembly and for the individuals when they're not in battle assembly. That one action creates a myriad of opportunities. First, of course, they need to be tested for efficacy. So the squad leader must learn how to design programs, which we cover in these classes and we provide as resources. So the CTAS individual per unit, remember there will be one per platoon size element throughout an entire brigade. So every platoon will at least have that one resource to go to. And if that resource, if that platoon, if that CTAS team member out of that platoon or detachment doesn't know yet, they don't feel as efficacious in the development of programming, then they can reach out to their battalion CTAS team leader. If their team leader doesn't know, then they reach out to me as program manager, and then I assist them with that, right? This is why we do consistent and continuing education every week to be able to manage, that aspect for individuals. But the squad leader and platoon sergeants are taught, the unit is taught, how do you do program design, which is in FM 7-22 now, actually. There's entire chapters on program design. So they're taught, how do you do program design, whether doctrinally or through evidence-based practices. And once they're taught, they teach their soldiers, how do you develop a program that works for you? This first opens up the opportunity for the soldiers so they understand that training can be specified to them, to their wants, to their limitations. That way they don't have to try and meet some arbitrary goal that they don't care about. And they don't have to worry about, oh, I don't have equipment to do this or equipment to do that. Okay. If you don't want to pay for a gym membership and you don't want to buy equipment, what do you have for the CTAS member to help you or for your squad leader to help you, right? If you feel you can't train 5 days a week, that's fine. How much time do you have? When do you have time? The CTAS member can help that squad leader manage that time for that soldier, right? So then we start in that almost one-to-one conversation, those verbal counselings between the squad leader / section leader and those individuals, which then helps them, as Sergeant Gonzalez brought up earlier, get to know that person more. Because in order for me as a leader to help my individual soldier, I have to know more about them. I have to know what's your occupation? What are your hours that you're working? What are the stresses within your life that may be preventing you, or at least what do you think is preventing you from being able to do this, which opens up entire different doors, right? So we start to see this cascade of effects. Then they actually train their soldiers in battle assembly, right? So you see your soldiers primarily need to run more based on the weaknesses you've observed, or they need to worry about jumping more, sprinting more. They need to work on their agility, their ability to squat with or without weight, the ability to pick objects up. Whatever that is, then that squad / section trains on their own, separate from the rest of the squads and sections within the unit. And the squad leader gets to observe the deficiencies of those individuals, with the platoon sergeant potentially being at different squads at different times. That way they can even observe the squad leader as well, right? We get that compounding effect. That way the soldiers learn where the deficiencies are because it's consistent. They see their leader cares. Their leader gets more information. And then the leader challenges their soldiers to develop individual programs. That way the soldier learns how to train for themselves and how to program for themselves. Right, and then the squad leader, of course, / section leader will eventually evaluate those programs just like the CTAS member evaluated them. Then we're educating individuals, right, to be able to improve their self-efficacy over time. What are your thoughts, considerations, concerns?
I think that would be very effective. Since they're changing like the ACFT and everything. Seeing what you actually need help with. For example, with me, it's Spring Dragon Carry. That thing kills me. I don't know. After that, and when I'm about to do the run, I'm dead. So I need to work on my muscle resistance and my legs, and targeting that specifically with my group that probably suffers from the same diseases that I do. That would be very efficient.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah. What do you think, Sergeant?
Yeah, that's the right approach, and it should be for a long time.
Yes.
Put in place, but I will not justify the system or the soldiers because we've been having so many taskers, so many missions at the same time.
Yes.
But this is one of the actual priority missions that we have to be fit and shape, because everything we do in the army is just to be fit for the war. It's
absolutely.
to be able to perform well. in a war. So, and we like been forgetting that aspect. That's why we can see a lot of people overweight in the army. And like you said, in every class that we are allowing with our body percentages to go up just to have the people in the system.
Yep.
But what kind of soldier you have in the system?
Absolutely. Absolutely agree. You have any thoughts on that, Sean Watts?
Yes, I mean, it's definitely a better approach because, you get to fix, through training the root causes of issues that soldiers may be facing. It makes it more personable, and it mends the bond between, the squad leader and the soldier. So it's a relationship.
Good, good. And I think from what the three of you said, to add on to some of the things mentioned earlier, we typically see that no one has been kicked out for PT tests, and we don't need the PT test scores to deploy, right? So we see all of these things take place, and we tend to see, hey, we do have a lot of taskers that are going on, so there's no time for PT. But typically we think there's no time for that because, again, we think about training as a unit, and we think about, hey, we have an MME, all of our soldiers need to be there. When in reality, are all of your soldiers constantly active
engaged in the MME, or you only have 10 because the rest are waiting in lines for hours?
Exactly. So when we take the squad/section element, we can allow for concurrent training. First squad can train while second, third, and fourth squad are doing one of the missions, and they can cyclically rotate. You don't need to be training for an hour. You can do a 35-minute training session, a 40-minute training session with whatever equipment you need, or maybe no equipment, depending on the assessment. But then we start opening the doors, as mentioned, because it's not just about the physical fitness score. It's not just about the body composition at that point. When you allow the leader to lead in this capacity, especially because this involves things that are, when that leader has to talk to that individual about things that are going to happen outside of battle assembly, that leader gets to understand their soldiers more. What is going on in that soldier's life? What is the soldier's current understanding of themselves, their current motivations, their current self-esteem? Everything comes back to this just by opening the door to allow leaders an opportunity to lead their soldiers with physical training. Right?
And also to add something to that, even that makes us more efficient if we start practicing the following up. Because
absolutely,
maybe we can give them a good advice, even if it's wrong or right. But if we implement the following up of that soldier, when that soldier see you calling him on Wednesday, how you doing? How you performing? Like that soldier, oh my God, he take out his time to call me and see how I'm doing. So this is for real. This is not just thing about assembly team that he gave me some advice. Okay, and I forgot to you for a whole month. No, when on Wednesday or Friday, I'm calling him again and say, how's your diet going? How's your exercise going? They say, oh, this is a different stuff.
Absolutely. We show that we care. All leadership comes back to servant leadership. As a leader, we serve the soldiers beneath us. It's not the other way around, right? The Army traditionally comes from C2Cs, right? So, or C2 rather, so command and control. We come from, this is my rank, this is my position, I'm telling you to do it, you just need to do it. And that was the Army I initially came in on, right? BDUs, over 18 years ago, was, I tell you what to do, you need to do it. And growing up, my experience throughout the Army transitioned from that to, all these new/young soldiers always want to know the why. They're always asking questions. They don't want to listen anymore. And then we start to see through science, not necessarily that the cultures necessarily change with the generations that they need to know more, but that if you have a soldier that we influence more and we teach more creative and critical thinking, everyone becomes more effective, right? And then you see Army doctrine start to adapt that understanding that the psychology is very important. So it's not about command and control. There's a time and place, as we mentioned earlier, right? If I need you to go left in a certain situation, I need you to understand what left is and not to question me and to go. But at the same time, I need you to be able to keep your eyes and ears open and to be able to react to certain things based on your experience. So you don't need me always there in a situation where I may not be there, right? So we never want our organization to crumple because that one leader, quote unquote, wasn't there. And you start to see just the physical training part, how we open up all that. Okay, so we'll move on. from that, because you're going to start seeing the same thing, right? So each of these slides are going to kind of go over how the pillars of CTAS, how these programs can be involved with leadership. With the Army body composition piece, and Sean Cabrera kind of brought this up when mirroring with physical training, because they're typically seen together, right? We typically think of readiness, and we look at, is someone passing, their height and weight, or are they not passing height and weight? How many of them are flagged? And that's generally where it stops. But as leaders, we cannot be deficient in that, down to the lowest level. So if you look at this just in the metrics alone, when it comes to body mass index and overall BMI, with body mass index, if you're at 25% body fat, you're overweight. If you're at 30% body fat, you're obese. In the Army, we allow, depending on your biological age, 20 to 26% for males, which means even at an older age, we allow the individuals to be overweight, even if it's ever so slightly. And then for females, we start the bare minimum with obesity as our passing standard. And it's not necessarily about how the soldiers look professionally. That does comprise part of it, right? That's the commander's initiative, and that's within Army doctrine, or Army regulation rather. But from a health perspective, not just looking at the readiness numbers, whether they're passing or not, if our soldiers don't understand, and our leaders don't understand, in order to influence and have this conversation with the soldiers, that every single % of body fat that they have over 25, male or female, every % over greatly increases the risk of everything. And this isn't just them getting out of a vehicle in theater and twisting their ankle. This isn't just making it harder for them to be medevaced or rescued in a situation where something goes down. This means that soldier could be sitting in a talk. They're at a higher risk of a heart attack. They're at a higher risk of cancer, higher risk of diabetes, of losing their vision, losing limb, of Alzheimer's, of dementia, of everything. And often we don't look at this because, unfortunately, this isn't always what takes place while the person's in the service. The only parts of this that we see while the person's in the service and we allow them to be overweight and obese for so long are they typically have some type of musculoskeletal injury, right? They perceive them as having a bad back, having a bad knee, having a bad shoulder, and they think of this usually with their biological age, right? The Army has worn them down because they've done all of these things. They're not looking at it as that mass is creating more tension on those joints, which is causing a lot of these issues that they're having. But then they do their 20 or however many years, they end up getting out. And now that they're out, even if they weren't meeting the physical demands of the Army, now they feel they absolutely have no demands. So now they're even less active because of their quote unquote bad back, bad knee, bad shoulders. Now as they become more inactive from their already low state of inactivity, now their increase of injury goes up even more. And their body composition may get even worse. And that's when they start having issues such as cancer and diabetes and everything else. And then we're taking these humans, these human beings who have given 2 decades to the service and forgetting about them, right? This, just file a VA claim, you'll be taken care of. Live your life now. But now their quality of life may be lower because we allowed that body composition aspect just from that one piece. And of course, it comprises of many other variables, but we allow that body composition piece to fail due to lack of understanding and awareness, right? So luckily, AR600-9 is updating now that DoD 1308.3, which governs all of Department of Defense, how they can manage their body composition. Now that one just came out this month, actually, to allow us to start changing some of the standards, we may see some updates, that are much needed based on evidence. But outside of that, we don't need an update to Army regulation for us to be efficient leaders. We just need to be able to manage our soldiers better, which means we as leaders need to know better so that we can educate them better. And similar to our prior slide in physical training, the squad/section, they should be having in those normal conversations, right? Whether they're verbal or written type of counseling statements, just sitting down as section time when they're talking about the limitations of that individual being able to physically train, right? What is preventing them from doing exercise on their own, or what are their capabilities? What are their goals? We can talk about, how are you eating? How are you sleeping at night? What is your understanding of food? Right? We'll get to the normal myths that we've talked about in all the performance nutrition classes. And individuals, and I hear it almost every week in these offices, where someone will come up to me knowing, or at least having a slight understanding of my background and knowing that, I'm, quote, at least into fitness and health, without necessarily understanding the depth of my own experiences in education. But they'll come up and they'll say, I'm doing really well. I'm only eating rice like once a week. And I very much want to tell them, it doesn't matter. You can eat rice every day if you enjoy rice, right? Modify your volume, and it doesn't matter. As long as your overall energy intake is balanced every day, you don't need to have the restrictions. But that's not always a good platform to talk
I had
about.
rice for breakfast this morning.
There you go. It's fine. And but those opportunities, to me, having these nutrition conversations with over 6,000 soldiers just in the last 8 to 9 years, or 9 years now, you see the common themes where, as a leader, when you have a soldier that mentions these myths that you're educated about, it tells you the understanding of that soldier, which means to you that was a learning opportunity for you to have a further conversation based on their understanding. Those are key moments. They're critical, because now I can sit down and not try and make that soldier defensive and be like, hey, you know you're wrong, right? No, that's not how you psychologically approach a soldier and making them defensive. But what that allows you to do is, listen, maybe 3 out of 5 of your soldiers think carbs are bad. So next time you have section time, instead of saying they're wrong, and you just have a nutrition class, or they can therefore go ask the CTAS member, hey, I've been noticing a lot of my soldiers have been talking about things that you've mentioned are inefficient. Maybe their practices aren't necessarily there. Do you think you can talk to the S3 and schedule in a nutrition class for next battle assembly? Then you start approaching the entire unit from the CTAS perspective, or maybe just to that squad, right? So missions can still go on, but that CTAS member can get with just that platoon, or maybe 1 or 2 squads, and have a class on the behaviors of understanding diet to start to address some of these myths. Then when they get down to the section time, the leader can be like, all right, so what did you think about, when our CTAS individual, whoever Sergeant so-and-so may have been, said that your body needs carbs? Then you get to the one-on-one conversation. Right now, it's the leader and their soldier. Now it's the personal. Now it's this is why I believe that, and then blah, 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 blah. And then we get to adapt behaviors. And back to what all of you said earlier, it starts to show that how much a leader is listening and how much a leader cares. This is where we start to implement leadership and affect our body composition and the cascade of variables that come after that. Good morning, good morning. You're starting to see all of this ties together, right? So we just had a few more individuals join us, for those that are in the room virtually. So it's good. We start to get more conversations. So just a quick pulling it back for just one second to tie it all together. So this morning, what we're talking about is a little bit different than what we have been talking about so far. We're not just talking about physical training. We're not just talking about nutrition. We're not just talking about physiology and things like that. We're talking about resiliency, and we're talking about leadership. We're discussing the practicality, the applicability of changing our activities during battle assembly to optimize opportunities for our soldiers to lead, as well as to improve, for the commander's perspective, all of these aspects of metrics and readiness. So we've already talked about how do we implement physical readiness training from a squad to section level, and how that actually introduces a myriad of leadership opportunities, changing the morale of the soldiers, improving resiliency, improving retention because the soldiers care more. And now we've finished just discussing kind of the body composition aspect. We're going to get ready to get into the next piece that ties all this together, which is nutrition. And we just talked about this with some of the nutrition classes. Now, the performance nutrition program, that pillar of CTAS, is a complementary program. Performance nutrition both supplements the performance side of our occupation, because your dietary practices, in order to increase your capability to perform, are different from your dietary habits that change your body composition. Right? If you want to look good versus be good, what you put in your mouth, how often you put it in your mouth, and that composition should vary some. It's not always going to be the same. Now, again, a lot of soldiers may not understand that. And that's where the educational piece comes in. Now, what's interesting to note on this is, and I'm going to tie this into with the title of this whole clinic, is the human domain. Right now, I could go to my S4, my maintenance section, my SPO section, and I could be like, hey, you know what? How many pieces of equipment do we currently have? How many of them are fully mission capable? How many of them are deadline? And they'll be able to pull a report. They can tell me where a generator is it working? What are the part numbers? What needs to be done on it? But if I go up to a squad section leader, a first sergeant right now, and I ask the same type of questions relatively about their soldiers, how many soldiers do you have? Okay, maybe to get that question. How many of them are at this level of physical training? May or may not know. I can tell you maybe the last time they took a PT test. I can tell you how good they may look in uniform, right? Or those that we typically see perform well. But we don't really assess the human domain. We look at the metrics of they are passing height and weight. They're maybe passing the PT test. And then we are maybe considering that fully mission capable. Are they MOSQ? Are they that? But we rarely really look at the human domain of it. We rarely look at that aspect. And with everything else that we track, all of these other things that happen annually, right? Oh, did you get your flu shot? Oh, well, we have to make an event. Everyone gets their flu shot right now. Have you done your GAT? Lottie-dottie, everybody on computer right now. I know we have 6 computers, but everything else in battle assembly stops right now so we can get everyone through to do their GAT because it's done. I don't care what your GAT says. I don't care that it took, 7 people with a PhD in psychology to put this together to give your commander a good indication of where you are. I just want to make sure that it doesn't say red when I pull your metrics on CSMM.
It's overdue.
Right? So we don't look at the human domain, but we look at all these things that we have to track. But typical person eats 3 to 5 times a day. And what do we track with our soldiers with nutrition? Not a thing. And this comes from the point where they're born to the point where they die. They'll be generally eating, around 3 to 5 times a day. Some people a little bit more, some people a little bit less. Right. But not only do we not track that as leaders, our soldiers typically don't track. They don't need to know every calorie that's going in their body. They don't need to be, as nuanced as that, at least not for the long term, but maybe in the beginning. Maybe to get a general understanding of how they're fueling their body, or just to even understand the needs of their body. Every single time I've taught a nutrition class for the last decade, usually how I started out, and for those of you that have been in my nutrition classes, you've seen that, is what does your body even need? And most people have no idea, but they eat every single day. Right, so it's the things that we're not paying attention to that usually are a downfall. And again, just as we talked about with Army Body Composition Program, the Physical Readiness Training Program, the Performance Nutrition Program introduces opportunities to understand our soldiers and to lead. Right. In this case, the CTAS member is likely to be more educated eventually than the squad leader will be, at least in the first year and a half, to be able to teach their unit on performance nutrition practices. And there's different classes for that. You can see 3 examples on screen. You can see a performance nutrition class, an actual body composition class for dietary practices, and then for overall conditioning behaviors and relationships with food, which are all 3 completely different subject areas revolving around nutrition. And then that squad leader can then open up and have, or section leader can have those conversations with the soldiers on, again, what do you normally eat? What do you like to eat? And then how do we modify that to help you meet your overall goals? Okay. Sergeant Latney, you've taught a few nutrition classes in your unit, right?
Yes.
What are conversations you generally hear or things you observed from your soldiers when you're teaching these classes?
For the most part, is more so, or the feedback that I get is like the same thing. What do you actually take in? How much you're supposed to take in? Some people think that if you eat a lot, you get bigger, but it depends on what are you actually putting in your body or your supplements that you put in your body. What's the difference between you actually working out and what you're actually burning? So, you know, that whatever supplements. So for the most part, it's more of a, like the same thing. We shoot back and forth. Hey, listen, you ask me a question of what you want to know. And if I have the answer for you, I'll try to guide you to what's the best answer. But everybody varies, and I'll tell everybody, everything doesn't work for everybody. So, I mean, everybody's different. Go see a nutritionist.
Right.
So yeah, for the most part, like I said, you hear the crazy stuff, more theories on what they think works for them. But it's more so, like you said, not, you know, you got the heavy trackers. Oh, well, I eat these many calories, this and third, but it's like you burn that off. Well, waking up, honestly, you burn that off just coming to work. So, like, what are you putting in your body? Oh, well, do you feel good when you go work out? Not really. I feel like I can do more, but I'm like, you're not even putting enough energy in your body. So it's you hear the difference. I mean, between the nutrition and actually your performance, it's a big piece. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Good. Any other thoughts on this so far? Comments, concerns for applicability? Okay, you want to add something, Sergeant Rodriguez?
Later.
Sergeant Paulo?
I was just thinking of this one soldier that, you know, we're trying to help him out. Like he's just a typical example. He's almost gonna be 20 years next year. And he's been E4 forever. And he's a great soldier, but his weight kills him. And now he wants to be an NCO. So, you know, I'm just thinking of him. Like, we have several cases, but I just got that soldier, so I'm just thinking of how.
Yeah, the dangerous part about it that I see, like, especially in my previous unit, the dangerous thing I see is you'll have an overweight soldier who does so much harm to their body because they have a mission that they get to, but they is improperly nutrition or is improper, like, so they starve themselves, and you'll see the difference.
Yes.
Just because you want to lose weight don't mean you starve yourself. You know what I'm saying? So it's just one of those things. Is like, that's why I tell them, like, I'm not an expert on it, but you should definitely go see a nutritionist because you know what's it. They'll be able to tell what is causing your body. Is it lack of the actual exercise, or is it actually what you're putting in your body? Are you putting enough in? So yeah. So I mean, I seen a person like literally destroy himself because he lost the weight, but as far as in his performance now, it's little to nothing, and then you know it depends on how the tightening, the eating, it all goes into it because
it's like
a tone, but you know, like
so let me add my perspective to everything that was just said and show you kind of where my mind goes with this, because they're all such very good points. So as a senior leader and as someone that's taught this for a while, I hear, you know, teaching the soldiers, I'm hearing common myths, and I'm observing in their, you know, they may be losing weight, but their performance may be dropping, that they're giving anecdotal experiences, their energy levels aren't there, and that may be, you know, indicative of inefficient habits. I hear we don't want them to just think that it's about body composition overall with the ignorance of nutrition, because then they can go to other extremes and increase the risk of injury. Then I hear, as well-intentioned as in this strong level of empathy from Sergeant Fallow, of I can think of a few examples, especially this one soldier, right? The soldier that tries really hard and they want to do things, but it's just this one thing. And at the same time, if you think of it from a senior perspective and commander, we look at those populations, right? We look at where are the red flags, right? As the adage goes, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. These are the people that are constantly failing. These are the people who are at least saying that they don't have good energy. And we spend a lot of time on them. And that's not a bad thing at all. But how are we addressing it holistically in our unit? How are we educating the soldiers as a whole, right? A class on nutrition, and then giving our leaders the opportunity to approach those individuals, right? It's not the full-time staff member's job that just cares a lot and knows a lot to help that one soldier that may be overweight. It's that squad leader / section leader's job. And they may not know. And if it's an ignorance piece, it's lack of education, that's where the educated individual may step in to further advise them, but not to take over. it's still that squad's, that section leader's job to develop that degree of cohesion and understanding for their soldier, for the understanding of their practices and what's going on. Right? Because this approaches or affects every single soldier in the unit, even those that are well performing. They still got to eat. Right? Everyone that's doing well, everyone in general, they still have to eat. So how do we take these opportunities and turn them into leadership opportunities, and how to change the mindset? And the other piece, which is true on none of us in here are registered dietitians, right? Regardless of the amount of certifications and nutrition experience I have, and number of athletes I've worked with, I am not a registered dietitian either. And they're the only ones that are able to actually diagnose medical issues that may be modifying or impeding some things. And I recommend to tell your soldiers, if you think there's something extreme medically going on, for them to see a dietitian. But be very careful, whether it's nutrition, physical training, etc., to introduce any opportunity to have a scapegoat behaviorally for that soldier. If that soldier feels that their situation is so unique and can't be addressed through regular dietary practices, which we know isn't true, right? Every individual on this planet can affect, even if they have some type of hormonal issue, such as some type of thyroid issue, whatever it is, they can still modify their dietary practices. It may not be as effective or as quick because of their hormonal issues, but they can still modify it. So they can always do something now as they're waiting for that opportunity to come. Because behaviorally, what typically happens if you say you need to see a dietitian, and all of the rest of those critical aspects aren't discussed, that soldier would typically go, okay, I need to see a dietitian. That may be somewhere on their, their priority list that they may even forget to do later, and then they go right back to everything they need to do in their life, what they think they need to do, and completely forget about everything else.
I usually only suggest it once I see the soldier making the effort towards where his goal is. So that's why I say it's a thing about it is that you can do it, but it can be technically dangerous or unhealthy the way that you're doing it. I don't know unless I really ask you, and usually I'm intrigued when I see people's body change because I pay attention to everything. But I only say like, hey, listen, man, you might like, what do you eat? And like, and I actually compliment you before I sit here and go into like, hey, listen, dang, you lost a lot of weight. Like, I mean, you look good. Like, what are you eating? And they would tell me like, oh, I've been starving myself. Okay, listen, you might want to go, that's not the way we go about this. But at the same time, it's just like, it makes something click on them like, hey, I already see it. Now, I just know you might have a overweight problem, but like I said, I will ask you, what are you doing for it? Because if you sit here and tell me your first thing, I don't have enough time to work out, or, basically I eat at the gas station pizza every single day because, my job doesn't allow me to eat, then I know where to guide you as far as, okay, well, let's start setting schedules up. You might want a meal prep, or, stuff like that, they get away from that stuff. But other people, like I said, when they actually, I see them put the effort into it, I'm like, hey, listen, there's a certain way you do this. You might want to look up certain foods you can eat that's not low calories or whatever you're shooting for. I don't know if you're trying to look like The Rock or you're trying to, be a skinny pop, but it's a way that you don't do it.
There are soldiers that they come forward to you. Like there is a PSC that she's so excited. Hey, Sergeant, I lost 4 pounds. I'm going to the gym. I'm doing this, and that. So yeah, that's a word that should be spread, encouraging.
Exactly. And look, from the resiliency aspect, this is so important, whether about nutrition or anything. Anytime someone chooses to come up to you and to give you information, positive or negative, if they choose you and everyone else to come up, one of the worst things you can do is criticize or give your own advice, even if it's something bad. The first thing you want to do is to reinforce that behavior. We want people coming to us. And the best way to do that is to acknowledge what they said.
Celebrate them.
Yes, absolutely. Sometimes you shouldn't even try and give them advice in that session. Just treat that session with the gratitude that they came to you, whether it was for good or for bad, and then wait for another opportunity to talk to them about what that is.
Yeah.
Unless they ask you for the advice.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Sergeant Garza.
That's what I want to say. In most cases, they will both go back to you and say, do you think I can do something better? That's
Yes.
your opportunity.
Perfect.
Yes, everything you could do.
Can do better. Sergeant Watts, go ahead. I think you were unmuting yourself for a bit there.
No.
That wasn't you?
No.
All right. So I'll say one more thing, we'll move on. Something I've heard quite a bit as well on nutrition, and it ties into the next slide. Sometimes we have soldiers that feel they can't lose weight. And I see this more often when I do the one-on-one counseling session post them failing ABCP or getting enrolled in ABCP, which should be the squad section leader's job, right? And that conversation being like, well, the reason I can't lose weight is because I have a bad knee, or I have a bad back, or I have whatever injury this is. And does physical training have pretty much anything to do with you losing weight? That's a question, non-rhetorical. Does physical training have anything to do with you losing weight?
No.
No. It's very, very.
It might cause you
very little,
depending on the activity, but
good.
Not at all.
That's something that leaders, especially senior leaders, really need to understand. And as individuals need to understand, physical training can help with, caloric expenditure and things like that, but it primarily tells your body how to use the nutrients you consume. But it doesn't make you lose weight. That only comes to your diet. That only comes to your diet. Now you'll still be a more efficient human and soldier by introducing more movement into your life. For all of the aspects of your neurology and your musculoskeletal system, your fascial tissue and stuff that get used to movement, producing force and managing load, that has nothing to do with weight loss and body composition. That all comes from nutrition. And it's very sad when an individual, due to ignorance, allows their body to be both deficient of movement and overweight due to those lacks of understanding, because they're burning the candle at both ends. Because they're both just going to make that person feel worse physically, emotionally, and it addresses everything. This even starts to get into a point of not only retention in the Army for an individual, as Sergeant Falou said, trying to promote, right? Trying to actually go to PMEs. This does affect overall mobilizations, right? If an individual is overweight and hurt, and this is affecting their psychology, it may be affecting their finances, it may be affecting their home life. Now you may want to take them away from everything for a year.
Right.
This affects suicide rates.
Yep.
This affects literally everything from us not just having a singular event each battle assembly with the section set squad leader is just sitting down and first training with their soldier to see what the weaknesses are, talking with their soldiers to see what their dietary practices are, right? And what their ideas are of their goal and their body. All of this comes back down to allowing leaders to lead, which further affects all those metrics that we normally want to report and get better at. This is where that starts, not with mass medical events, not with SRP events. Those can happen and those will take place, all these other things, but this starts with leadership, right? And that ties into injuries, which is our next slide here. We've discussed this in 3 classes so far, both with pregnancy and postpartum, and with overall individuals that have a DA 3349. Leadership perspective, CSMM data, readiness, metrics are how many people are on profile? How many people have temporary permanent profile? What questions are we not asking as leaders generally?
The follow-up.
Which is what?
Like you said, that counseling statement that says what we want to do from this point on to here to rehabilitation.
Yes. What was that, Sergeant De La Garza?
Plan of action.
A plan of action. Yeah. From the squad section. What is your plan to get better? That one question that doesn't happen from a squad section means that one, from the individual perspective, that soldier doesn't typically even know they can get better.
Right.
Because the first word in front of their profile says permanent. And they think that means for life because they don't understand. That changes everything. That one thing, they may feel they can't run around with their kids. They can't, throw a ball with their kids because they have a bad shoulder, because they've inherited it as part of their character. Changes their entire quality of life. From the squad leader's perspective, / section leader's perspective, they think they have a soldier that can't do cyclical inventories. They can't go and I'm not even involved the soldier in most activities because they have a profile. I automatically discount them. Is this activity physical? Because a lot of our activities are. Automatically discount them. You can be a driver, maybe. You can do these other things.
Or usually it's the other way, as far as in now, you got the so-called broken soldier placed into all the extra duties, so he's not even doing his actual real job to rehabilitate what he's supposed to be doing.
We isolate these individuals, and that further reinforces their understanding of their injury as part of who they are, and it decreases their capability of improving their behavioral patterns to get better. So it's a caustic and inefficient action all the way down to the squad and section level if they don't understand how to help their soldiers improve. It's not just about can you take the PT test or not and what events they are. For our TPUs, that's once a year.
Right.
That's one day out of an entire year. That's not what we should be caring about as leaders for a leadership opportunity. How well is that soldier able to move and live their life? Just with everything we've discussed with physical training and body composition, same thing with injuries, same thing with nutrition. The injury aspect introduces an opportunity for the leader to lead, to understand their soldiers, to understand what's going on in their life, and we could literally save some of our soldiers' lives by having some of these conversations. Okay. How this will work practically. Of course, leadership education connection, the CTAS member. Those are paramount of all importance to start to get rid of ignorance within the unit as overall. But then during those section times, whether it's a developmental counseling through verbal or written, in this case, I would recommend written. As each of you stated, for plans of action, things like that, for the squad leader to say, what is your plan of action to get better? And then, as Sergeant Cabrera brought up earlier, and one of the most critical pieces of leadership is to follow up. You should have section time at a minimum of once per day per battle assembly. If any unit, regardless of your actions are going on, whether you're AT, whether you're deployed, it doesn't matter what missions are going on. If you don't have section time every single day in a battle assembly, everything we've discussed so far starts to go down the hole. And you start to see how when we allow these leadership opportunities to go down the hole, everything else starts to fail. Everything. That squad leader doesn't get the opportunity to talk to their soldiers to see where their deficiencies are, with their understanding of their skills and their occupation, understanding where does that person have a job right now? How is that person doing in school? What are those person's life stressors? Why do they feel they can't lose weight? Why do they feel they're constantly injured? Why do they feel they can't perform well? Those whys are answered at the squad and section level, and that's where they're addressed in section time. Okay. From the injured soldier's perspective, they learn that their condition can improve. Boom, just that, getting rid of that ignorance. And they may not even believe it. It may take several months for them to change their years worth of established behavior that this is their bad knee. It takes a long time to change behaviors. It's not just one conversation. But once that soldier gets to understand they can do better, and they're not oscillated. They're not isolated from the rest of the unit when these events happen. They're just doing what they can, and they're modifying what they can. Right? They start to improve their overall quality of life. These start to improve all of the metrics for the commander for us to meet their intent on retention and ACFT, ABCP, getting MOSQ'd, getting promoted. All of those things start to change. Any input or anecdotal pieces, some experiences that you have that anyone wants to add to this conversation? Good. All right. So the last of the pillars of CTAS to talk about for this one, The only pillars we're not going to be discussing here directly are the leadership development program and the total tactical program, because all of this ties into leadership. And the total tactical program is a very special case that is the only pillar that isn't a normal battle assembly activity, is the resiliency readiness program, which ties into, as you can probably see, everything we've already discussed, right? Now, resiliency is per regulation, right? Per AR 350-1, how often are we supposed to have resiliency classes with our soldiers?
Once every 6 months?
More often.
It's like every 3 months. I give a class every 3
Good.
months.
It's once per quarter.
Yeah, I get one every 3 months.
Per regulation, it's once per quarter.
And it's not just hunt the good stuff.
Exactly. But here's the thing. There are competencies, right, that are supposed to be taught by an MRT. You have MRTs can go onto armyfit.com and pull any of, or and you pull any of these information at any point in time to be able to teach your classes, and that's good. But we can take that the other step further into the practicality of everything we just discussed is teaching resiliency. Teaching individuals the mental agility of being creative with understanding how can I develop a physical training program given my limitations, both physically and within my environment and within my occupation. I work nights. I work swing shift. I have 4 kids. How do I find the time to develop a physical training program for me to get better and to track that I'm getting better? How do I take the things that I like eating and modify it to meet my goals? Those critical thinking aspects involve optimism, because it involves goal setting, first of all, which is a competency in itself of resiliency, developing SMART goals. You develop optimism from the idea of an individual understanding that they can get better. You develop the ability to get rid of thinking traps and icebergs because you start to challenge their biases and their understanding of, I have a bad back, I have a bad knee. You start challenging their biases and thinking that they can't be physically fit or it's not for them, right? So we start to approach our mandatory regulation for resiliency while helping our soldiers by holding section time, by doing physical training and educating them and improving their quality of life. Then on a training schedule, it's not why I need an hour of PT and I need an hour of resiliency class and I need to do this, and that's where we start to see there's not enough time. That's not what it is. It's all the same thing. It all ties in to those same opportunities by providing opportunities for the leaders to lead. It opens up time on our schedule while improving the metrics, while improving readiness, and most of all, works on the human domain, the most important piece of our entire organization, which is the soldier, right? So the biggest thing I want to mention for this piece, as aforementioned, is once per day, per battle assembly, if your unit isn't having a section time, you're doing your soldiers a disservice. Now that of course means that the squad leader needs to know what to do with that section time.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's not just it's put on schedule and everything gets resolved. We have to develop leaders. The first sergeant's job is to develop who? Yes, but more specifically, what NCOs? The platoon sergeants. As a first sergeant, with all the other responsibilities that he or she has, trying to develop every NCO, that's where there's no time.
Mm-hmm.
They can be an advisor and should be open to any NCO that wants to come to them. But they need to directly work with their platoon sergeants, which means that first sergeant only has how many people to really work with?
Depending on how many platoons he had.
Exactly. Maybe 1 to 4.
Right.
Now you change that ratio from 1 to 20 to 30 to 1 to 4. That means that there should be section time with who?
Section time should be the platoon sergeants and squad leaders.
There is that as well, but the first sergeant and the platoon sergeants. And again, the platoon sergeants only have 4 people, the squad leaders. That's it. They don't need to manage everyone in the platoon. Even if the squad is 9 individuals, what should that squad have?
It should be team leaders.
Team leaders to be able to manage those teams. Those what those section times should be. So in the beginning, it's rough because people need to learn. People need to be educated. But we need to look at the long game with this, right? For the overall human domain, we look at the long aspect of how do we approach it, because we're one of the most complex logistical organizations on this planet. But we don't have a product. We don't sell anything. We are one of the few organizations on this planet that delve into humans, period. That is who we work with, but that's the last thing we typically track in a way that's effective for the things that we've discussed. All right, so we need to be able to tie all this into us serving our soldiers. Questions, comments? All right, so I want to close this by saying one more thing with the CTAS aspect. Remember, comprehensive tactical athlete system is for the 166 RSG. This is our H2F, our holistic health and fitness initiative. And if you're looking into almost any doctrine that's coming out, almost anything that's total Army wide, it's very rare for you not to see H2F. You look at the operations plan they're coming out, everything for rearm, for training, for us to deploy, for us to do our NIMA mission, everything revolves around H2F. If you look at the Army people strategy, which involves the entire aspect of getting people into the military, maintaining them in the military, and the soldier for life. So some of the biggest aspects, which right now is we're coming off of the 2020 strategy. We're now in the 2028 for all NCOs and leaders and soldiers in general. The entirety of that revolves around H2F. Everything comes back to understanding the human domain. So to close up this recording and this overall session, you keep seeing the logo for the Comprehensive Tactical Athlete System, right? And the logo for that is, a circle with a human analog, the human in the center being the human domain, the soldier, the ones that we are trying to affect, not the metrics on a sheet. That's subsequent to us allowing leadership opportunities to better our soldiers. And then you see 8 leaves around it. And those 8 leaves are the pillars of CTAS, the programs that we can utilize in order to help our soldiers be better people, right? To be better leaders, to do better at their job, and just to live better lives, right? So this is going to bring this particular clinic to a close. I greatly appreciate everyone for being here and participating in this. Again, we do these bi-weekly clinics. If you're noticing, I know a lot of people for the time frame of this, because we used to start all of these at 9. So I did create a new SharePoint that I put within our Teams page for CTAS, and there's a calendar on there. Please pay attention to see when the clinics are going to be starting. I'm trying to do some of them a little bit earlier to take away from some of the aspect in the workday, and some of you mentioned that it's better to be able to start a little bit earlier, but I'm always open to feedback on a time that would be more opportune for everyone. Okay, so I'm going to bring this to a close. Again, thank you everyone for participating, and I will see you on Thursday.
Cool.